Once again, as I said, my name is Jack and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Jack.
Thank you, Laura, and Mac, thank you for your share. I really appreciated that. My home group is Queen Anne Gay Group. I was at the first meeting of that group. There were 7 of us, and I believe I'm the only one left. That was like in the mid 80s. But there were similarities in Mac's story. I grew up on the East Coast, born in the Midwest, but grew up back there. Both of my parents were born in small towns in North Dakota, which maybe 200, 250 people. And they were not prepared to deal with me. Mac said he came out, I think, at 16, and I didn't feel a need to do show and tell with my parents, but they were going to get to the bottom of what was going on. And so I was 70. And by way of helping you understand this, my dad had top security clearance with the Atomic Energy Commission. And the 50s was the McCarthy era. And they were looking for commies and queers. And during his security clearance updates, if they found out that he had a gay son, he would have been suspected of being blackmailed. He could have lost his security clearance and his career. So it was a challenge for me, but it was a challenge for my parents also. I didn't really start drinking until I was in college. And now I've been sober for about twice as long as I drank, which has been a real gift to me. In 1978, when I got sober, I left my home and I was going to go drinking at one of my 2 favorite places. And instead, I wound up walking into the basement of a church to an AA meeting. So God hits, to me, come in many different forms, and that was certainly one of them. After that meeting that night, I was headed out of that basement, going up the steps 2 at a time to get the hell out of there. And a woman said to me, "Are you coming back tomorrow night?" Well, I'm just codependent enough that I said yes. And I came back the next night, and it was a Friday night, and I have one sobriety date for which I'm very, very grateful. But I had all my slips before I ever got here. You know, it was, I'm not going to have another lost weekend. I'm not going to, go to drunken parties and hang out and so forth. But I kept doing that. And when I woke up Monday morning, that Friday night I got sober. When I woke up Monday morning and I had not had a drink all weekend, it was a miracle, you guys. It was an absolute miracle. And 3 days later, since I had also hoped that I could quit smoking, and I don't recommend this, but I quit smoking cold turkey 5 days after I got sober. And I swear to God, I laid and looked at the ceiling in my bedroom for 2 weeks. Didn't feel like I slept a wink, but it worked. It was such a miracle that I didn't have to drink. And I thought maybe it could work with smoking, and it did. I was fortunate. I got involved in service very fast because they asked me to be an alternate secretary of a meeting. And a week later, the secretary quit. So I became the secretary. And I've had the privilege of doing service in many forms within AA and also outside of AA, because I think service occurs in many forms. I served on the board of the Recovery Cafe for 6 years. that was a wonderful experience. Also, the Public Information Committee gave me an early opportunity to go out and speak at schools. And I had the privilege of speaking at grade schools. And with those grade school kids, you could see on their faces which families had alcohol in them. Then I went to the junior high school. And the junior high kids were a little more cagey. And by the time I spoke at a senior high school, it was like talking to a wall. They weren't going to let you know anything. But I was able to do that, and it felt like a real privilege to give back at that level. And I remember one little guy came up to me and he said, "Can I have 2 of those schedules? Because I want to put one under my mom's pillow." You know, and yeah, so it was significant. When at my first meeting, they broke for a first step, and we went and sat in the kitchen, and there were maybe 8 or 10 of us, and those people in that meeting told every secret that I'd ever had, things that I would never share with anybody, and they shared about them openly. And there was one woman, her name is Cayenne. She was a little bitty thing. She had carrot red hair. She drove a big old Chevy pickup, and she wasn't tall enough to see over the steering wheel. She peeked between the steering wheel and the dashboard. And she shared at that meeting, she said, "Whenever I see the cops and I'm drunk, I pretend that I'm invisible and I drive faster." And I thought, these are my people. You know, I felt like really had arrived. You know, and we were a really tight-knit group. We socialized. We went to a place called Blocks after the meetings every night up on Capitol Hill. And we really became quite close knit. And we'd go on camping trips together. On one of the camping trips, we had an AA meeting out in the middle of the river on a big boulder. It was just, we really supported each other. You know, people from in this campground, we'd have an AA meeting around our campfire, and other people would kind of drift in. And when they realized that it was an AA meeting, they'd drift right back out again. But we were a tight-knit group. One of the experiences that I had with the man that I shared my home with when I got sober, and so I went to a meeting every night that first week. And he said, "Well, where have you been going every night?" And I said, "Well, I've been going to AA." And he said, "But you're not an alcoholic." I said, what about this stuff? Well, you come home and I'm passed out on the couch. He said, "You just drink too much. You're not an alcoholic." And I went to Fremont when Fremont was in Fremont, you know, and it was crazy. And I went to a Hoot Owl 2 weeks after I had gotten sober. And it was the most bizarre group of people I had ever seen in my life. You know, and I didn't want to admit that I was a chronic, or that I was, I was periodic and binge. I wasn't a maintenance drinker. You know, I was special. But I think many of us are. You know, when I read the big book, I thought, geez, that's antiquated. You know, I'd sure like to see it done differently. Now I defend every word that's in there because they're all so important to me. And we were given, as newer people in Alcoholics, we weren't in Alcoholics Anonymous, we weren't the founders, but they gave us a legacy that is totally invaluable. My home group, my first home group that I became secretary of like 2 weeks in, was called Spiritual Study. And each week we would read either a tradition or a full step from the 12 and 12. And so I didn't really get involved in working the steps, but I was exposed to the steps. And when I look back on my experience with it, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Yeah, there was no question there. My life was unmanageable. Absolutely. Absolutely. And on the second step, I no longer had to invest energy in trying to convince people I was sane, because I was not. You know, I did crazy stuff. And much like Max said, my traditional religious upbringing did not really work for me, because this thing about being born in sin, I just can't buy that. So I was told this, a good way to approach it would be to say please in the morning and thank you at night. I still do that many, many years later. And it's just a connection that I have. On page 85, I'm not a big book thumper, but on 85, it says we're given a daily reprieve contingent on our spiritual condition. And that really works for me. And my concept of a creator or whatever is still changing and growing. And that's one of the privileges of this program, that I can, I can do a designer higher power. And we have the freedom. It doesn't tell us we have to believe anything. We just, take that as a suggestion and move forward. So I didn't do my first fourth step until I'd been sober almost 2 years. And, I thought I was going to do the perfect fourth step. Mm-hmm. Are there other people here who thought theirs was going to be perfect? Because I don't think the perfect one has ever been done, you guys. And I wasn't certainly the one to do it. But moving on through the steps are so important. And like I said, I wanted to rewrite the big book. But the longer I'm around, the more I understand why they're sequenced the way they are. And we did a workshop out at the Center for Spiritual Living when it was on Sandpoint Way. And we had somebody come in that did all 12 steps in a one-day format, which is what they used to do many years ago, bringing new people in to the fellowship. And it was really interesting, but I also firmly believe that time is my higher power's way of dropping everything on me all at once. Because if that had happened, I'd still be headed across the hills. So the two most important things that I heard in my first meeting, the first one was the first word of the first step, which is we. The second was that I didn't have to quit drinking forever. It's just for today. And those two things made sense to me and brought me back. And also, I got sober in an era where the promises were not read at every meeting as they are now, frequently. But do you know how many times it says we in the promises? It's either 14 or 15. I'll let you guys count them and figure out which of those is right. But that we thing, I had promised myself time and time again, I wasn't going to get drunk and waste another weekend, but there I was doing it over and over again. And so I had the power to get sober, but I couldn't focus it until I got into the we of the program. And I talked about going to Fremont Hall. There was the big meeting where there was a lot of big book thumping. And then they had a room called the Side Room Sickies. And they talked about feelings and they talked about other things relative to recovery. And there was one fellow, Old John, and one day in the Side Room Sickies, he recited the promises from memory. And I said, after the meeting, I said, wow, that's really awesome. I said, where is that from? He said, well, it's in the big book. And I said, well, where in the big book? He said, do you have a big book? And I said, yes. He said, why don't you read it and find out? So, it's not always gentle, but we get the message that we need to have. I talked about service through public informations, and I also, for a period of time, went into the King County Jail. And I don't know if any of you have been in the institutions or whatever it's currently called, but when you go in there, once you're cleared, you go into the general population. The guards are behind bars, but they open the door and let you in with the general population. And it's quite an experience because often that AA meeting in there is the only chance in the week that they have to get off their cell floor or, out of their small group. But it only takes one, it only takes one person hearing that message. And all we're responsible for is carrying that out. Another thing that I had the privilege of doing when we started the Gay and Lesbialano Club up on 15th on Capitol Hill, we had 15 groups. Each group was renting from the church for $15 a month. So it was $225 total that we paid in rent. When we found the club, it was going to cost $750 a month. Well, how were we going to make up that difference? So what we do, we rented cup hooks for $10 each, $10 per month, and you could hang your cup on there. And we had enough people join and hang their cup so that we could make up that difference. And a tremendous number of people got sober in that yellow house. And for many people, in fact, less than a year ago, we had a meeting down here, which was the anniversary of that, and brought people in who had gotten sober in the church basement or the yellow house. And it was really a lot of fun. How am I doing?
You're doing great.
Okay. Yeah, it's, I also tell people that I'm an unprosecuted felon because driving drunk is a felony. So I don't know if there are any other unprosecuted or prosecuted felons in here, but I can't get all high and mighty because I drove a lot drunk, you guys, which I should not have been doing. The close-knit nature of the people that I got sober with. I think I mentioned we went to a place called Blocks up on 15th, which is no longer there, but we'd go after every meeting. And there was many times that it was a lot better AA at those coffee meetings after the AA meeting. There was a woman said to me once, I was trying to explain to a newcomer that difference between the first 90 days and 6 months in my program. And I said, I just had a year, and this woman tapped me on the shoulder and she said, you know what comes after 1 year? 1 year and 1 day. I just wanted to rip her face off. But it's so true. It's so absolutely true. I never know when I'm carrying the message. Like I said, I didn't do my first fourth step until I'd been sober a while. And the thing that amazed me after I had finished my fourth step is my sponsor invited me to stay for dinner after all the stuff that I had just shared. And I knew instantly that there were things I had left off of that. So I'm able to go back and use any long-term sobriety gives me the privilege of going back and working any step when I need to. If something comes into my field of awareness that I didn't process, I can do it now. I can do a single item fourth step. it's just amazing the opportunities that we have. I wrote our stories disclose, I wrote a paragraph for the Queen Anne Gay Group because it had never been in there. And when I went back to the church, and they went back in their records and couldn't find out when we had actually started. And we couldn't find it in our bank statements because we had lost some of those along the way. But we know it was about 85. And a huge number of people have gotten sober in that church basement too. I have a dear friend who's no longer with us, but he got sober in Boston and came out here. And one of his favorite sayings, and this I can really relate to, and he says, steps 1, 2, and 3 are the wake up steps. 4 through 9 are the cleanup steps. And 10, 11, and 12 are the grow up steps. And that really works for me because at this stage in my life and in my recovery, if I'm focusing on 10, 11, and 12 to the best of my ability, that's a roadmap of how to live. So I've had so many privileges in terms of service opportunities. Trying to think of what I have not talked about and what I'd like to add. I've still got 8 minutes. Wow. Wow. Holy Toledo. I've covered a lot of ground. But so I was 39 when I got here. I'm looking 87 right in the face in 2 months. So you can do the math. It's been one heck of a trip. The people that I have met, when I was sitting in a bar drinking and somebody would say, how are you doing? And if I were to say I'm working on my spiritual program, that probably would not have been well received. I can talk about what's really in my heart. I've had the privilege through the Center for Spiritual Living to do a lot of reading. And my concept of higher power is changing. But each day I do the St. Francis prayer from the 11th step, sometimes more than once a day, And when I say please in the morning and then thank you at night, usually there are other thank yous scattered through the day. Like when this time of year, when I sit out I brew a mug of tea and go and sit in one of the parks or over on the Amazon campus. I live in Belltown in a low-income senior building. And, the quality of the colors of green this time of year when those leaves are just starting to open, it's almost fluorescent. And those same leaves were doing that when I was drinking, you guys. But I wasn't conscious of a lot of that. And I wasn't paying attention. Let's see. What am I missing here? We've hit on gratitude. Gratitude lists I can do real often. And sometimes I do many a day. Like I said, I lived in Belltown, and the street people in Belltown are just, it's so sad. I see people that, they can't respect any kind of organization. And I realize that they don't esteem other people because they don't have self-esteem for themselves. And I think those of us who find Alcoholics Anonymous are given a gift that those people may never find. And when I watch the people who try to keep the parks clean interact with those people, you couldn't buy a ticket that's that entertaining when you watch that interaction. I live close enough to the Amazon campus. I brew a mug of tea and go over there and take a book and sit and read and, or just meditate. You know, I don't know how I had time to drink, you guys, when I look at my life now. And certainly earlier in my sobriety, you know, I've been busy. I've had friends. We do things like these camping trips, you know, and when I need help, and just because I've been doing this for a while doesn't mean that I don't need help, because I definitely do, you know, and at least I'm better now about recognizing when I need it. And I've got people that I can talk to, and they give a hoot about what's going on. And I return that favor to them. So there's that word "we" again coming up. I think I'm just about maxed out.
You did a great job. Thank you.
But thank you all for your kind attention and listening. And it's because of you guys that I'm sober. You guys, all of you are responsible, or people just like all of us, because we carry each other. And so thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.